Good evening and welcome to Conservative Corner. I am your host, Tom Mountain. I am the Republican State Committee man for this district, which includes Newton. I was also the chair of the Newton Republican City Committee until most recently, this past June, for a period of a decade. And we are a monthly program which deals specifically with issues pertaining to Newton and the surrounding area and the district in which we live, which is the 4th Congressional District and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in particular. And specifically, we deal with issues that you wouldn't necessarily hear on the airwaves in this very liberal community and the surrounding area, which is also very liberal, much to our dismay, shall we say. Nevertheless, we present the Republican viewpoint here on this show, and we welcome your feedback. We welcome certainly your attention, and we hope that you will tell your friends and neighbors about it. Every month we have a new and interesting guest, a Republican guest, who has something to contribute, to talk about, to add to our community, to our program. And this particular month, in October, we have with us, and we're very delighted to have her back after, I believe, a 2-year absence, and that is Colonel JulieHall. And Colonel Hall, thank you for coming onto the program. You are a retired colonel. You're a retired Air Force colonel.
Correct.
And how long were you in the Air Force for?
30 years.
30 years. And you retired as a full colonel.
That is correct.
One of the few women, I would add, who did become a full colonel. And you're from Attleboro.
Yes.
And the reason why we're having you here now, in addition to when we had you here before, is because you were a candidate in 2020 for Congress. So actually, we would have had you here right before the shutdown 2 years ago. And you were a candidate for Congress in 2020 for the 4th Congressional District, which is where we live. And you're also going to be a candidate, or currently a candidate, I should say,
yes,
for 2022 for this same district. Now, in the last congressional race, you did win the nomination, which we were very glad about. However, things didn't turn out the way we had hoped, in that you ran against Jake Auchincloss, who was a city councilor in Newton for several years. Jake actually was at one point a Republican, and then he was a Republican in the closet. Then he became independent, then he became full Democrat in order to run for Congress. And of course, he won their primary by a very slim margin. I believe it was 22.5% of the vote that he won their Democrat primary. And because he and his family, in particular, was so connected to the medical world, and I believe with his divorced parents and their spouses, they're all doctors, and they were just, their wings were spread so far into the medical world that the donations to his campaign kept coming in from all quarters. I mean, we're talking Boston, New York, Washington, where his father was the deputy to Anthony Fauci, and the mother was a director of a leading hospital here. So when you have that type of a network of clout, and even though every individual is limited to campaign contributions, still, when you have more than a few hundred or several hundred, that's serious money coming in. And that's the money that he had, which propelled him to A, win the primary, and B, win the election, because obviously he outfunded you by a huge amount.
Huge.
By a huge amount. And this district is not necessarily, it's certainly not a liberal district, although being from the perch in Newton, one would think that it is Newton and Brookline, but it really isn't. And the district goes where? All the way down to the south coast.
Correct. Past Fall River, all the way down to Somerset and Swansea, Seacong.
Does it go into New Bedford?
It does not go into New Bedford.
Okay, but we're talking a lot of communities like Norwood and Walpole and Foxborough and places like that, which are white-collar to blue-collar communities. Mm-hmm. So they're not really ritzy liberal neighborhoods, communities like Newton and Brookline. So my point being is that, and I've always said this, that this district is winnable for a Republican, and the right Republican who has the right message
Yes.
and the right connections and the right persona. And quite frankly, I think that you have all of the above, all of the right stuff.
thank you.
I really do. And I was on the campaign trail with you in the last election in 2020, and I anticipate I will reassume that role as well, as will many people in the community who are very big fans of yours, both personally and politically. And we're grateful to have you here tonight. What I wanted, I'm very sorry, I keep coughing. I should mention, people, that just as an aside, when I had a severe bout with COVID several months ago, and one of the after effects of that is that when you tend to talk a lot, as I tend to, or did, I tend to cough a lot as time goes on. So I don't give long-winded speeches anymore like I used to, only because I can't. So consequently, my lungs are tied, so to speak, with that. So hopefully I'll let you talk more than I talk, since you're the guest. But, you know, Colonel Hall, one thing that I think that people are very disturbed at seeing this district is Jake Auchincloss. Obviously, he's a freshman congressman, but what we've seen with his public appearances have, shall we say, been less than impressive. And he's almost served as a mouthpiece for Joe Biden in the Afghan debacle. Now, there's always a few congressmen that any sitting president will pick to be the mouthpieces to the people. And Jake is one of them. So he's gone on the talk show circuit, really justifying what was and continues to be the catastrophe that was the American withdrawal from Afghanistan. And, you know, it was mind-boggling how he could just get up there with a straight face and just say the nonsense, spew the nonsense that he did, pertaining to how allegedly this withdrawal and the situation in Afghanistan was actually a very good thing and a wonderful thing. And he spinned it to the point where you have to ask yourself, you know, is this guy living in a parallel universe, or is he just reading from a script that the White House gives him? I think the latter, obviously. But Americans are very smart and common sense people in that we can see and understand through our eyes what's going on, and all you really have to do is turn down the volume for NBC and CNN and just watch the pictures, which is probably better, of what was happening in Afghanistan. And yet there's Jake Auchincloss, basically not even serving as an apologist for the president, but because he felt as though there's nothing to apologize for, because the Afghan situation was actually handled brilliantly by Joe Biden. So what is your take on that?
Oh, yeah. I was very, very angry at first what happened, obviously, and, you know, even more angry now that people have moved on, or seem to have moved on, and forgotten that 13
Americans, including one from Lawrence, by the way,
sons and daughters.
Yes.
You know, and, you know, what really made me angry was the one statement in particular that anybody that wants to come home, that's American, can come home. And I told everybody, listen real carefully to what's being said here, because they're setting you up. So that if somebody doesn't make it out of Afghanistan, they can simply say, well, it's because they didn't want to. My opinion is, did 13 people, is that the way they wanted to come home? And yes, I am angry, because I'm a colonel, and to me, that's unacceptable. Unacceptable. Now, getting out of Afghanistan, yes, it was a long time. We were there. People know the kinds of things, and I've gone on other shows and given them my perspective, and I'll tell you, from my perspective, I've gotten so much feedback, and the answer that keeps coming up is, oh my God, she knows what was happening there. She really understands what was happening there. You know, the thing that I thought was difficult about with Jake was, you know, he's holding himself out there as the expert on national defense. I've been in for 30 years. He's been in the reserves, right, for maybe, 6 years? And so I'm watching this person, and I say to myself, how could these different networks not ask, what are your qualifications?
Well, you know, I've often said that he's not ready for prime time. And part of that is my recollection of him, as he was in the Babe Ruth League when I was coaching not too long ago, about a decade ago, and he was one of the kids on the other team. So he's in his early 30s, and he was like, we used to call him Boy Joe Kennedy, in that he wasn't ready for prime time either. They just weren't with their life, with their very limited life's experiences. And of course, Jake came from a background of privilege, Auchincloss, and having their both parents as doctors, so, and living in a very affluent neighborhood in Newton. So he comes from privilege, which for the life of me, I can't figure out how in the world people in Norwood and Fall River and everywhere in between can relate to someone like that. I mean, he can't even hide his try to dress down with his fashion, so to speak, because he's just so used to shopping at the most exclusive places, I'm sure. And being with his Harvard pedigree, it just doesn't add up how he could get so many people voting for him. But nevertheless, there was a fundraiser for him, and it was last month, and it was in West Newton Hill, which is one of the wealthiest neighborhoods in Newton, if not the Commonwealth. And it was headlined by Nancy Pelosi. Now, I will admit, we tried vigorously to find out exactly where and when it was, because we wanted to go be heard and have a protest there. We were all set for it. However, despite digging and digging and digging, we couldn't find out until the night before, and by then it was too late, in that, you know, you have to make up signs, you got to make up banners, and you got to spread the word. And when you find out at like 9 o'clock at night for a morning event the next morning, you really can't get the crowds out, and in addition to the fact that it was going to rain anyway. So we were hoping that the rain would sort of be a washout for the event. But nevertheless, one thing that we wanted to do was really confront Nancy Pelosi on this debacle in Afghanistan, and just to try to expose her and him for their complicity in this. Jake Auchincloss has chosen to align himself fanatically, I was going to say loyally, but fanatically to the Biden administration in that. So if he is going to align himself with such a foreign policy disaster, then we're going to call him out on it. And not only that, but he's also aligned himself with the current travesty on the southern border with Mexico, which is totally, I mean, it's indescribable. We could spend 2 hours on that as to what's happening there. And of course, on the economic level, the rise in inflation, the rise in gas prices, the fact that the supply chain, which nobody ever heard of before, by the way, or at least it was not in the American lexicon, suddenly it's a major issue. It really is, in terms of the ships coming into ports not able to get in to the ports to deliver the goods. And people say, well, it's because of COVID. Well, no, you can't blame COVID for everything. That's becoming tiresome. A lot of it is due to the severe restrictions and regulations by the federal government, which the Biden administration are enforcing. And Jake, of course, will serve as the apologist for the administration. One thing
he does that. You know, he does that well. Apologize for every time that
he's
called
does.
out. He apologized, and it must be nice to be able to just apologize your mistakes away.
I know, he does. One thing that I found interesting was that usually every 10 years in the census we lose a congressional seat. We didn't this time. Now, what would have happened, I think, we would have lost probably, or this district would have been sliced up, but it wasn't. And that's really a relief in many ways, because now we have this congressional seat, which is still within ours, so now we still have 9 congressional seats instead of 8. But it's the fact that you still have to run against Jake Auchincloss, who again is well funded. But you know, my take on this is just because someone is well funded and has gazillions to work with doesn't mean they're necessarily going to win. And that's something that we have to be leery of and be conscious of. And I've seen that in Republican circles where people without money, so to speak, have won nominations as Senate.
And if I could just jump in for a minute on this one, because I think it's something near and dear to my heart. I run a very grassroots campaign, and I always have. And I think the important thing for people to know is that I came in late to the election. I was not out there. You know, when I look back at some of the articles that went on, they were 2 years ahead of time before Jake even ran. Came in late to the election. I, pretty much spent under $100,000 and still got 38.9% of the vote. I call that a win. That is, and we can continue to move off of that. That, if you think about that, what I just said, we've got the right message.
Well, the important thing is you do have the right message. You really, really do. And especially what is going to happen and what is happening now is, again, once we get down to the dismantling of the economy, so to speak, which has been undergoing just in the past 9 months under this administration. And as Bill Clinton said famously, many in a different generation, it's the economy, stupid. And I think that that's what we're going to see. People will see the debacle that's happening on the border with Mexico and foreign policy issues. And of course, the Biden administration and Jake, who serves as his spokesman, is disastrous in foreign policy. But once it starts affecting people's pocketbooks, when they see that gas prices have risen to such an extent, when they see that basic foodstuffs have risen, and for example, there's a McDonald's right around the corner from here. You can't go into the McDonald's really for a lunch or a meal and for less than $8, whereas before it was $5.
How much are the French fries now?
Exactly. I mean, it's really gone up.
But French fries, yeah.
And now they're talking about, well, because of the supply chain, there won't be enough. We won't even be able. The stores could be out of toys or whatnot, or things that you would need to give for Christmas and the holidays. Now, how does this apply to Jake Auchincloss? Well, it applies directly to him as a congressman, as a Democrat congressman, as a part of this disastrous Biden administration. He is a cog in the wheel of a cog in the machine, rather, of the Biden administration. And he is, when you see the prices going up to the extent that they are, and you see the gas prices, and we may have gas shortages in time, whereas before we had a gas surplus and prices were way down, you need to think you'll think of Biden, but think of the congressman who represents you, who is his representative here, because we're talking about this district. And elections have consequences. That election, electing Joe Biden president, had enormous consequences for our country. And electing Jake Auchincloss as an affiliate to that president, as an ally to that president, also has enormous consequences, which is why, in large part, we're having you here tonight. And we're having you here to talk about your candidacy and what you hope to accomplish for the district. And the other thing that we've seen is we haven't seen him around that much in the district. Now, maybe if he's here, he certainly is and has been invisible.
He has been hanging around my part of town because I hear and I can understand why he's doing that. Knows I'm running again and wants to shore up his, But the thing is, I have been around and done, I get involved in the communities very actively. And when I'm not physically running, even when I am, I'm a doer. I do things with people. I help them hold signs for their elections. I am that kind of a person. That's the kind of leader that I am. And when you talk about the struggling, I understand that. I'm one of those people. I am a middle-class, working-class person. I grew up in the heart of the district in in Walpole. Walpole is not in the district, but that's where I grew up. It's right next door. But Attleboro is a gateway city. These people struggle. I run into people every day on the street that tell me they can't find homes and how expensive things are and so forth and so on. My difficulty is that we have not been represented. There's 34 cities and towns in this district, but when you take the median income and you rank it, if you would, there's a huge delta between Needham and Newton and Wellesley. Now, is that a bad thing? Doesn't mean that there's bad people because of that. I'm concerned about the representation of the middle class and the working class. That's who I want to see represented. And I don't feel that somebody who doesn't live that way or live that lifestyle is really in the right person to represent us. And that's why I run also, because if you look at these numbers, if you want to follow the math, because that's what the math said. And historically, every representative has, in the district, the last 4 actually, have come from one city. And that would be Newton. Newton, Newton, Newton. And remember Father Drinan? There you go. So even though Father Drinan may have come from part of the city, he did work up here for a short period of time.
Well, you know, a very long time ago, in fact, I believe it was 1982. We're talking 40 years ago. Margaret Heckler, who was the
Yes.
congresswoman from Wellesley, ran against Bonnie Frank because those districts were combined, and she lost. And so from that time onward, not only we've had very few Republicans in Congress, but she was the last female Republican that we had in Congress, and that was a very long time ago. Now, I'm sure that the smart people of our district know that of the 9 congressmen, congresspeople in representing us from this state, every one of them is a Democrat. Every one. Now think of that. It's a total monopoly of one party where they're all Democrats. And this was not the way it was intended to be. This is not what John Adams and John Quincy Adams envisioned it to be, to have one party ruling all the time. We need some Republicans there. Quite frankly, I wish we had a majority. But that's not going to happen anytime soon. We at least need a few there to represent us. Now, bear in mind, we haven't had 2 Republicans representing us in Congress since the early 90s. Again, almost 30 years ago. We need to get a Republican or more in Congress. And right now, the best hope, really, I think, having been in Republican politics, having been involved in every major statewide campaign for at least the past decade, is this district, this 4th congressional district. Why? For 2 reasons. Number one, we have a relative novice who is the current congressman, and that is Jake Auchincloss. Number 2, we have a superb candidate in Colonel JulieHall, and Julie is of the persona, shall we say, that the more people who meet her, the more likely they are to vote for her, because in addition to her lovely personality, her engaging personality, she is a very accomplished former military officer as a colonel and as a woman colonel. And there aren't a lot of women who can point to that title and say that I was a colonel, and a full colonel at that. Now, many will rise to the rank of lieutenant colonels, and then they tend to either retire or they're, quote, washed out because they can't go beyond that. But Julie made it to full colonel, which is really an extraordinary accomplishment for anyone, but especially with the, shall we say, the male-dominated armed forces, but especially for a woman. And that's right below becoming a general, a brigadier general. And she did this for 30 years. And I believe you didn't go to the Air Force Academy.
No. I was enlisted.
So you enlisted.
I enlisted.
You enlisted, and you went right up through the ranks. That's
Right
extraordinary.
Yes.
That's very, it's very unusual in a good way, in a wonderful way, in that you enlist as, what, is it a private or is that?
No, I was an airman basic.
Airman, that's, of course,
Yeah,
forgive me.
airman
So you
basic,
enlist as an airman, and then eventually you go right up through the ranks to full colonel. That's really
Yes.
extraordinary. It's really more or less a Horatio Alger story from that you were able to pull yourself up that way. And, you know, someone with your credentials, with your service to our nation, and with your impressive credentials of rising to that rank, certainly deserves to have a shot at Congress, certainly deserves to be in Congress, certainly should be in Congress. And I can't stress enough that that needs to happen. That really needs to happen. We need a voice of reason, a voice of sanity, a voice of common sense, and somebody with a real extensive military background, which Colonel Hall has, which the others in Congress do not have. Now, some do, but not to the extent where you have a career military person like Colonel Hall has been for 3 decades.
Yeah. Well, I think the other part of it too is, I was hospital administrator for 30 years, and that was very operational. When you talk of 30 years of experience, I think experience is the key word there. That's the other thing I bring. You need somebody with experience. There's so many things, so many challenges that are going on in this country now. You need an experienced person. And, to be around when some of these other things were happening. I mean, I've seen SARS. This is the second time in my life. Now, who would have thought? Well, that's
You've seen what, I'm sorry?
SARS. So
Oh,
SARS,
the
COVID,
disease,
yeah.
yes.
That's back, I've been working in the hospital. It's not the first time we've seen it.
Yes.
So, I think that those things are important, that you have somebody that at least spans over a couple of decades.
So when you were in the Air Force, you were in hospital administration.
Yes.
So you're well versed in treatment of patients and certainly overseeing, shall we say, in the military, you're trained to take in mass casualties.
That's correct.
And to oversee them. So you're very well versed in that.
And not only that, but after I did get out of the military, my first contract was to teach the public health service how to deploy for just situations like this. So I knew we had these capabilities and kind of sat here in Massachusetts wondering, when are they going to kick in? When are they going to kick in? And, so I do have that experience. I also have a broad base of experience. I was an operational officer, logistics, money, human resources. I have it.
Well, Julie, these things come with living a life as an adult in the workforce, but in managerial positions, where in your particular case, now you weren't a CEO of a multinational corporation where you would make millions or several million a year. You were a colonel where you would make a livable, decent salary,
Yes.
but nevertheless, you were in a very important position overseeing huge entities and huge
correct.
enterprises within the military. And that's why we need you in Congress, and that's why we're going to fight for you. I want to stress or make mention of the fact that, before we leave, is that a great American passed away this morning, and that was General Colin Powell, who was also Secretary of State. General Powell served in Vietnam right up through the ranks, and he is one who didn't go to the academies as well, and he was the Chief of Staff, and he was also the first black Secretary of State, and he was a Republican. And my only regret with General Powell is that he didn't run for president in 2008, because I'm convinced he could have won, and I wish he had, in which case we wouldn't have had Barack Obama, we would have had the distinguished General Powell. So our condolences to him, and thanks to his family, or rather to him, for his great service, and now he is in the great beyond. So please remember him in your prayers, and remember him in your thoughts, as we do, and we will. So Colonel, thank you again for coming. We will be seeing you here in this studio, and we will be seeing you on the campaign trail, and we will be seeing you in Newton. And best of luck to you.
Thank you.
And so please, if you would, come back.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having
The
me.
pleasure's all mine. Thank you so much.